Right now on Straight Talk, as President Donald Trump marks 1 year in office.
We took a country that was dead, and it's the hottest country in the world right now, and that's after 1 year.
The state of Oregon continues to fight against his agenda.
This is a systematic attempt by the president to really attack pillars of our democracy.
We sit down with Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield after his first year in office and talk with him about what's ahead in 2026.
A huge win for Oregonians and a check on the president's power.
Right now on Straight Talk. Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Tim Gordon in for Stephanie Domerat this week. It has been just over 1 year since President Donald Trump took office for his second term. Since his inauguration, we've seen a flurry of policy changes, executive orders, and lawsuits to carry out the president's agenda. Many of those faced strong pushback here in Oregon from Attorney General Dan Rayfield, who is also marking 1 year as the state's top prosecutor. Attorney General Rayfield joins us now for a look back at the first year in office. And thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me.
You bet. Well, Dan, tell us about your first year. How has it been in your new role?
Well, I mean, it's incredibly busy. There's a ton of energy in the Oregon Department of Justice. And when I came into the role, we always talked about doing three things. One was keeping communities safe. The second one was how do we improve the work we do on behalf of working families, seniors, and consumers. And the third thing we always talked about was how do we protect Oregon's values. And during this last year, that one right there, protecting Oregon's values, has really risen to the top given this federal context. And that's often what you're seeing in the headlines today.
Right. What are you most proud of, do you think, in the first year?
You know, I'm proud of all of the work that our frontline attorneys have done to protect Oregon. When you think about the wealth gap in our communities, right? We have attorneys ourselves leading the nation. And that's Oregon, leading the nation when it comes to fighting the unlawful tariffs that the president has implemented. The Oregon Department of Justice hadn't been in the United States Supreme Court in more than a decade. And just a couple of months ago, we were arguing cases on behalf of all of the states against these unlawful tariffs that are increasing the prices that we're paying. It increases the prices that small businesses are paying. Incredibly heady stuff. When we think about the National Guard, where you have a president that's trying to normalize the use of the military on our streets, we have lawyers and staff working around the clock to be in the courtroom to prevent the National Guard from even getting on our streets. And we were successful with judges that were appointed by Republicans. So incredibly proud of the work and the teamwork at the Oregon Department of Justice. Now, even more importantly, we're doing that. But then at the same time, we're starting pilot programs in Washington County to tackle organized crime, things like human trafficking, drug trafficking. At the same time, we doubled the size of the people that are working on our consumer protection work, protecting Oregon families. We launched a working families unit. So great stuff, incredibly busy, and it's fun to be a part of that team.
And you and your office have been extremely busy for sure. We're going to talk all about that coming up. Is there something you felt you could have done better in the first year?
Oh gosh, if I was going back and looking at it, I was like, I wish I had made one of my son's, cross-country meets one more. I almost went to them all, but I always you always regret, how do you balance, really investing yourself fully in the work that you're doing on behalf of Oregonians, and then you still got to be, at some point, a husband and a father too. So
yes, you do. Your office has joined other states in more than 50 federal lawsuits over the past year. How do you, as the Oregon Attorney General, decide which cases are important, which ones you're going to get on with?
We like to have kind of a real sterile formula, and how do we see this world? Because I don't want to be known as this partisan attorney general. What I want to be known as someone that is value-based and we're operating according to what the rule of law is. So when we look at a given issue, the first thing we ask is, are Oregonians being harmed? If the answer to that question is yes, we would do the second part of the analysis, which is, did the president do something that was unconstitutional or unlawful in any way? And if the answers to those are yes, and we have standing, we move forward with the case. And that, unfortunately, where we're at today, because I would rather have not had to bring 53 lawsuits, but we're now at 53 lawsuits here in the state of Oregon.
That's a huge volume of lawsuits in 1 year involving the federal government. It's just something else.
Yeah, I mean, you never thought that President Trump would be one of the greatest things to happen to lawyers.
Boy, seriously. Well, good point. You told Oregon lawmakers the Department of Justice you spent about $3.1 million pursuing these legal actions against the federal government. What do you say to people who feel like that's too much time and too much taxpayer money working on those federal issues, and you should be doing more for Oregonians?
Yeah, the first thing I say is the Oregon Department of Justice is the only department in the state of Oregon that can represent Oregonians when the president is threatening to cut off funding to the state. And so what was at stake here was $4.6 billion of federal funding coming into this state. Now, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have a president that's violating the Constitution. We wouldn't have a president that's making unlawful actions. And under those circumstances, none of these lawsuits, absolutely none of them would have had to have been filed. But that $3.1 million that we were forced to spend as a result of the president's actions effectively got $4.6 billion flowing again into the state. Now, the fascinating thing here is a lot of these cases, think about like victims of crime money that comes into this state. We filed a lawsuit, we put up a fight, and then the federal government, they waved the white flag, and the money started flowing again. Now, we should never have had to spend that money, but we did, and the victims of crime advocates across the state are better off for it.
And now an example, the president is again threatening to cut off federal aid for sanctuary states, which Oregon is one of, by February 1st, I believe.
Yeah.
So are you going to have to fight that battle again?
Let's hope not, right? And you said the exact same thing, fight it again.
Yeah.
Right? This was the same fight that happened during his first 4 years. That fight happened. It happened in a court here in Oregon, and we won. And if he does it again, we're going to win again.
On January 8th, your office announced a formal investigation after 2 people were shot and injured by Customs and Border Protection agents here in Portland. Where does that investigation stand right now, and what should the public expect in terms of transparency around what happened there?
Yeah, and the way that we approach this, right, is the Oregonians, especially in a time like this where you've had multiple shootings that are going on, there's a trust issue in America right now. What we really need and the values that move us forward is transparency and, when appropriate, and that's the key part, when appropriate, accountability. So right now the FBI is doing their own investigation. We're doing a parallel investigation. We believe at the end of when we're able to get to the end of the investigation and the end of the conversation, we'll have enough information to be able to fully assess what has gone on and provide a measure of transparency to Oregonians. Again, we're not really talking about the details right now, but really focusing on the process.
Sure. And in that process, I mean, what authority does your office have to investigate use of force issues with federal agents involved?
Well, that's the interesting thing, right? In normal times, right, you would have trust that, the FBI is going to do their work, and we just have this political environment right now where that trust is eroded. So having parallel investigations, and you do have the authority, because you remember, a lot of these things, there are state law crimes, right? And it doesn't matter who you are, you got to follow the laws of this country. So we do have authority, states do have authority, local prosecutors, local police entities, as well as the Oregon Department of Justice, have authority to look into those things. And that's what we're doing right now.
You have the authority, but do you have the evidence? Is the federal government helping you or assisting you in providing information in terms of this case?
Yeah, and we can collect our own evidence. At the same time, the FBI is collecting evidence as well. And we believe at the end of the investigation, we will have enough evidence to be able to say to the Oregon public that, hey, we have what we need for full transparency and, if appropriate, accountability.
So, and then what is the Oregon DOJ's role in protecting Oregonians from this excessive use issue with federal agents?
Well, this is an interesting thing that we're seeing. So during the trial that came out with the National Guard, you had testimony under oath, right, where excessive force was documented in a court. We're talking about real facts. So this is something that we'd seen real early on. We've created a tip line for new information so that we can keep track of what's going on. In some other states where we're seeing a pattern in behavior, some lawsuits have been filed. And those are the things that we're keeping an eye on when we're seeing, and I believe that we have an obligation at the Oregon Department of Justice, when we're seeing Oregon laws being violated, we have an obligation to investigate and, again, when appropriate, enforce accountability.
You work with other state attorneys general as well to look at how they're doing in this issue as well?
Absolutely, and the coordination is pretty impressive. You have incredible public servants, and what I would say is we have incredible public servants here at the state of the Oregon Department of Justice, staff and attorneys doing this work on behalf of Oregonians. What I would point out is that all of these attorneys and staff and all of the offices are communicating with each other, talking about the different things that they're seeing and how we can better represent Oregonians under those circumstances. National Guard case is a wonderful example. That was not something that started here in Oregon. That started in California. We learned from that. We took a little bit of a different legal strategy and approach where we wanted to prevent the National Guard from hitting the ground here in the city of Portland. It was successful. Now, we may take different strategic approaches in different states, and I think that's appropriate, but having that communication, understanding what their circumstances are is incredibly helpful.
Right. We're going to switch gears now a little bit, and we're going to talk about something that earlier this month you filed a lawsuit seeking more than $900 million, alleging insulin makers and distributors drove up prices over the last 15 years, even as manufacturing costs fell. So what do you believe happened, and what do you want to change there, Dan?
Yeah, well, this is a part of that initiative that we talked about at the beginning. How do we stand up for working families? How do we stand up for consumers and seniors? And you have people across our country that are on fixed incomes, and you have certain things that are going on where certain companies, manufacturers, are taking advantage of these circumstances. And in the case where they are price gouging, and I'll just shorthand that, the Oregon Department of Justice, the attorneys, the staff, we are there to step in and protect Oregonians. And that's what this lawsuit is about. And it's the beginning of a bunch of initiatives that we're going to start continuing to push in these areas. The fun thing that we've done over this past year is we've doubled the size of the attorneys and staff working on these issues. So hopefully, over the next year, Oregonians will continue to see more of this work going on, as I really believe that this is an essential function of the Oregon Department of Justice.
And in terms of this lawsuit, if you win, what should patients expect and when?
Well, these things take time, so I always like to set expectations. What we want to do is be able to get accountability in this space. So over time, right, when there is accountability and these actions are no longer acceptable, hopefully over time, that will make sure that prices stay more affordable, right? And everybody knows this right now. We're facing prices that are increasing on all different types of goods. And so we're looking at the tools that we have. How can we play a role in making life more affordable?
And here's another consumer protection issue as well. At the end of last year, your office, along with 52 other attorneys general, secured a settlement against Google Play for $700 million. Who's eligible for that settlement, and how are they going to receive any money from that?
Yeah, and if it's the one that I'm thinking of, there are certain things that will go directly back to consumers, and then there's other penalties that are also assessed under those circumstances. Again, a really good illustration of things that are going on behind the scenes where you have public servants looking out on behalf of Oregonians. And it's exciting to be a part of their team because there are some of the most creative staff and lawyers that we have working day in and day out on behalf of Oregonians.
As we said, your office is a very busy office this year for sure, and last. All right, well, we're going to take a quick break now, but when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Oregon's Attorney General Dan Rayfield. Stay with us. Hello and welcome back to Straight Talk. We are continuing our conversation with Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield as he marks his first year serving as the state's top prosecutor. Again, welcome to Straight Talk today.
Absolutely.
Yep. Well, we're going to talk about an issue that you've been involved with. Your office was involved in multiple SNAP cases this year, this past year, I guess I should say. One involving eligibility guidance that was later revised after the USDA reversed course, and another involving the federal government's request for recipient data. Where do those cases stand now?
Yeah, and I think as we think of the United States, we think of Oregon. We're one of the most wealthiest countries in the world. And I think we start off with this proposition that Oregonians, I think, uniformly believe that no one should go hungry in our communities. And that was a really big motivating factor for these lawsuits. And you mentioned there's actually a third one as well. So you came into the situation where there was a federal shutdown. There was contingency money set aside for benefits, SNAP benefits, and every single president in the history of the United States would use these contingency funds to make sure that food are going to the most needy people in our communities, right? Again, nobody should go hungry in our communities. And this was the first president that held those contingency funds back as a political play. Absolutely outrageous. So we filed a lawsuit on that, got the money flowing back again. The one that you mentioned right there was where we have invited refugees, asylum seekers into this country, and you have to meet certain eligibility requirements to actually get SNAP benefits. By rule, they changed the game, right, which was contrary to the law that Congress passed.
Now, cut those people out.
Yeah, and so we had to file a lawsuit there. Some of the most frustrating things that are going on, because we had people coming into state offices in tears because they were losing their benefits. Wild things that are going on, which is a bigger part of this narrative where they are actually pulling back food assistance. Because you got to remember, the president in his wisdom went to Congress and pulled back more food benefits to all Americans at the same time that our health care costs are rising. So this was a big movement for us to push. We've been very successful in these cases. Again, the reason we've been successful is the law is pretty darn clear. And so I feel very fortunate. Again, we really believe that more needs to be done. I think it's a partnership between Congress and attorneys general, but ultimately the president and his administrators need to follow the law.
Okay, and I think we should acknowledge here there are plenty of people that believe that the president is doing the right thing. They say, this is what I voted for. But for you, working against a lot of his initiatives, you mentioned frustration. Is it frustrating to be dealing with so many of these issues one after another?
Right, and I think you bring up a really good point, right? There are people that supported the president, and those folks would like to implement the president's agenda. But here's the key thing. You got to implement your agenda lawfully, right? And there's ways to do that, right? You get a tremendous amount of power as the president, and we need to respect that. However, when the president wants to make certain changes, a lot of the things he's trying to do via executive order are things that must be done in Congress. But I think the assumption here is that he can't get the votes in Congress for some of the things he's trying to do. I have plenty of friends that are Republicans. And when we talk about these things, we all uniformly agree. We all want accurate elections. The integrity of elections are paramount, right, for us to have trust in our democracy.
Sure.
We actually, I've never met a human being that sits there and says, hey, I'd like to have more people with less food in our communities. That doesn't exist, right? So how do we as a society implement these common values? So very weird things going on. We're taking our role very seriously. Follow the law. If you want to implement your vision, do it, but just do it lawfully.
This next question probably falls right into this same pattern here. Oregon joined other states challenging the Department of Health and Human Services actions that you say threaten providers of gender-affirming care, including excluding them from Medicare and Medicaid. Can you tell us more about what your office is doing to fight this case?
Yeah, and we've had to file lawsuits based upon this value set, right? Politicians don't belong in the doctor's room. It's just that, right? Most politicians do not have a medical degree. I trust medical professionals who've gone through, tons of school, right? Tons of continuing education as they are becoming the best practice of medicine for themselves and for the families. And so what we trust is that practitioners and families and patients can sit in a doctor's room and make the best decision for themselves, and I should have no say in that. And that's really what this is about, is allowing people to make the best medical decisions for themselves given their individual circumstances, which most of us have not experienced personally, and we really need to respect that. And so that's what this is really getting at, and the president and a lot of other folks are trying to put themselves in between that doctor and that patient, and that's something we just don't think is appropriate.
Right. Many people watching this. Where does this case with gender-affirming care stand right now?
And that's still pending in the courts, and that will, just like a lot of these cases, will start winding its way through the various courts. Yeah.
Of Oregonians who support stricter federal limits here, what's your response to the argument that if federal dollars are being spent here, we should be abiding by federal rules?
Right. Well, there is the way that Congress implements certain federal spending, right? And when Congress sits there and says, under certain circumstances, this money must go to the states, the president doesn't just get to step in and then modify what Congress does. That's not the way our government was ever set up, right? Pretty common sense stuff. And that's why the courts are sitting there and ruling, hey, no, you got to follow what Congress passed. I go back to that thing that I mentioned earlier about Victims of Crime Act, right? Where the federal government waved the white flag. The president came in, said, hey, I'm going to try and change the rules of the game that Congress set. And when they looked at the math, when they looked at the details, they waved the white flag because they knew they were going to be not successful in court. And that's why that money started flowing again. That's the crux of a lot of these funding lawsuits, right? The president has to stay in his lane, right? Congress gets to do their thing. And when the president isn't doing that, then you have attorneys general who will stand up and say, no, you need to start following the law.
Eventually, some of this makes it to the U.S. Supreme Court. What's your take on that and the makeup of that court in this day?
Yeah, what I would tell you, I think, and I think there's a lot of folks that have a question what's going on in our court systems. What I would point out right now is you have Democratic judges, Republican judges that are doing their best to make the best decisions based upon the facts before them. And if you walk into a courtroom today, it is one of the most humbling experiences to watch these judges try and sort out what the facts are and truly apply the law. It gives me hope in society. And one of the things that was probably the most humbling experiences of my entire tenure during this last year is when we sat in the United States Supreme Court listening to all of the justices grapple with incredibly important issues for our democracy when looking at whether tariffs can be applied via an emergency order. And that was a very humbling experience, and you saw those justices coming to conclusions as they were walking through this that I think were very healthy for our democracy as we're moving forward.
Let's bring it back to state issues here that are kind of affecting a lot of Oregonians. When you ran for Attorney General, and you mentioned this at the top of the show, you really emphasized improving public safety and dealing with the opioid and fentanyl crisis. What have you been able to accomplish there in the past year?
And really what we wanted to do is take a more proactive approach in the community. And that is what we've started to do. Now, with our resources, we went out to Washington County, amazing District Attorney Kevin Barton out there. We also have some other wonderful district attorneys across the state. So, you know, for the other 35 I didn't mention, my apologies. But what we wanted to do was do a proof of concept and really partner with local law enforcement, partner with the local district attorney to be able to get out into community and use our expertise at the Oregon Department of Justice to really start drawing links together. And so we created a pilot program attacking organized crime. And that's what you think about, like human trafficking, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, drug trafficking. Getting out there, we have financial crime analysts, right? We can put people on the ground to better partner, to get better outcomes, and again, curb the root cause of some of the issues that we're seeing. Because right now, as law enforcement, especially in rural Oregon, is struggling to find the resource, they're doing the day-to-day. They're doing the immediate response to the burglary. Are you able to have the resources to dig down another level to see how these things come together? And oftentimes, these things are connected in different communities. And that's what we can bring to the table to start improving community safety across the state.
Making some headway already?
Absolutely. I'm excited. And the next year, I think there will be some really good results.
So let's talk about the next year. Looking to 2026, what are your top priorities for this next year?
Well, we ran on, again, keep communities safe, improving, how we're protecting working families and consumers, and then protecting Oregon values. We're not shifting from that. We're doubling down. We're going to work twice as hard. I think we had a wonderful first year. I'm very proud of the work we did. That just means we have to work twice as hard going into the next year. And that's where we're going to continue to keep moving forward. So that is, hopefully, I'll be able to come back. We'll talk to you about all the wonderful progress that we're seeing out in Washington County. We'll continue to come back and talk about how we're, again, really trying to tackle, the wealth gap in our communities and protecting families and seniors. And then hopefully we'll have less federal lawsuits. Hopefully the president's going to start following the law and we won't have to file as many, and we'll spend less time on that and more of these other issues.
There it is. So you came out of the legislature, you're Attorney General for Oregon now for a year. And in that year, I just am struck by how out there you've been. I mean, you were at the U.S. Supreme Court, you're on national news coverage. What's that been like for you?
When I ran for this position, I don't think this is what I envisioned. And then when I say I don't think, it wasn't what I envisioned. Okay, right. Let's just be real clear. Yeah. I never thought, like a year into this, we'd be sitting here talking about 53 lawsuits against the President of the United States. That is heavy stuff. It's heavy stuff for democracy. I never thought that I would do as many people would want to talk to us about all of these things, right? It has just become a critical and essential part of the job. I view it's a very important responsibility that we have in this moment. But at the same time, to sit there and say that I expected these things I wouldn't be being honest, right?
About 30 seconds left for you. You enjoying it?
I will say it is meaningful. It is tough work. It is incredibly humbling. I think, again, and what I really want Oregonians to take away is the amount of work by the people at the Oregon Department of Justice that do on behalf of Oregonians every single day. It is incredibly humbling to be a part of their team. We've been going around and people have been working there 40 years.
Wow.
Very few people work in any one place 40 years. We see people all the time, 25, 30, 35 years. It's an incredible place to work and just incredible public servants.
Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield, thanks so much for joining us today on Straight Talk.
Thank you.
Happy New Year. And thanks for watching. A reminder, you can stream Straight Talk on your own schedule. Download the free TV app, KGW Plus, available now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. We'll see you back here next week.